So the principle of efficient language, we've got to talk about money. So what is your money? We're talking about the principle of efficient language in our physics program. And what is the product that you are trying to efficiently buy with your money? So money in this context is the quantity of language objects such as zeros and ones or English letters or whatever your code is. It's the quantity of code elements. So these language elements are, for us, are probably going to be something that we call multivectors in the E8 algebra's root lattice and or other things. But there'll be these objects of information which are mathematical, and we'll be able to reduce them to some simple irreducible representation. So the rules are given by games or simple programs, which are basically algorithms, and I suspect that these are functions of functions or functionals. And the product that we want to buy with the economized usage of our money is meaning. So how do you efficiently use language with as few words as possible to express as much meaning for as little words, right? That would be an efficient use of language. For example, let's say that we have the meaning of a movie that is coded in a manner that uses an amount of X money or code elements. You know, X can be 10 or 15 or any number. And we wish to economize and try to use less money, which we're going to write as, you know, just less than X or X minus N. So X minus N can be some quantity of floating point operations or some units of electricity or some quantity of zeros and ones. So a compression algorithm written in some language that achieves X minus N and costs 10 bits is less efficient than one that achieves the same X minus N of information with only 9 bits, right? Because you're using less elements to express the same thing. So let's get more abstract. Perhaps the money that you want to save is calories, and the product that you want to buy is 2 meanings about love using English poetry. So if you spend 1 calorie to vibrate the air with a single spoken word, it will require more calories to use a poem with more words. So you try a poem with 10 words to express your dual meanings about love. And then you try a poem achieving the same dual meaning using a compact double entendre. Now the same meaning is expressed with only 5 words. It is a more efficient use of language. So you have saved your money, your words, but you are expressing the same meaning as if you had not economized. So this is the principle of efficient language. And our axiom is that the universe follows this principle. It tries to get maximal meaning for minimal thought or computation or math. In the SSH paper, we explain 2 forms of meaning that the universe wants to create efficiently. One is called emergent physical information, right? Like atoms, electrons, and their relationships. So we call that in our paper EP for emergent physical. So this would be things like the meanings of atoms or the lower order meaning under them of quarks and electrons. So more than that, EP is also the particles' relationships with one another. How fast they are moving toward or away from one another, what is their relative angle of their dipoles, etc. So EP is the meaning of the particles' states and their relationships. Atoms then form even higher order meaning in the form of, say, DNA, with its states and its relationships to the states of other systems. So all language or code expressions are hierarchical, where letters each have meaning, but group up in ordered sets to form words, sentences, and so on, which have emergent meaning at higher levels. So letters as particles go to words as atoms, which go to molecules like DNA as sentences, and upward with no limit to emergent complexity. That's the unidirectional arrow of time. So we index our strata of meaning in a language hierarchy with a subscript number such as EP1, EP2, right? So electrons and quarks could be called EP1, and then atoms could be called EP2, and then molecules made of atoms like DNA could be EP3, and so on. For example, in certain circumstances, the game's energetic efficiency rules makes it have a high probability or high language efficiency for 3 quarks and an electron at the rank of EP1 to self-organize into a hydrogen atom at EP2. Similarly, circumstances can make it more energy efficient for atoms to self-organize into something like DNA at the molecular level of EP3, and so on. So if the only meaning present in the system is EP, physical meaning, then quantum mechanics will dominate. However, when EP evolves into high enough strata above DNA and into systems so complex that life emerges, something strange occurs. Highly improbable friction occurs with extreme statistical deviations from quantum thermodynamic probabilities. Let us use an example. David Chester is a physicist at Quantum Gravity Research. He has an abstract idea within his high-level emergent consciousness, or EC, that he must make his mortgage payment, and he must help society by working here on quantum gravity research, where we pay him so he can pay his mortgage. So he's got these 2 abstractions in his mind, in his consciousness. As a result, he drives from the bottom of a 2,500-foot gravitational energy well up to our campus 5 out of every 7 days. He uses these abstract ideas created in his consciousness to produce a 71% probability he will use energy inefficiently for the purposes of EP and generate friction to get to the top of the mountain each day. He is making a conscious choice to go against the probabilities of efficient quantum thermodynamic expression of microevolutions in favor of his preferred abstraction of economizing EC information. That is, the EC of him making his mortgage payment and working on science. He might choose to take the shortest path as he drives to work or operate his car to minimize friction. But he is choosing to steer countless particle-level events to do actions not statistically directed by quantum thermodynamics. He has instead used his consciousness to hijack the probabilities of quantum mechanics in favor of chasing an efficient expression of his higher order abstraction. In other words, his efficiency is getting to work on the shortest path, not allowing all the particles of his body to fall into their lowest energy state. In our paper, we call this abstraction of his emergent consciousness information EC, and it too exists in a hierarchy of emergent consciousness 1, EC2, EC3, and so on, where one magnitude of EC emerges from the strata below it of lower magnitude. David scans forward to run mental simulations, perhaps subconsciously or at least conceptually. From the vantage point of Thursday morning at 6:30 a.m., he projects and probes a future goal in his mind, such as the thought of having a productive day on top of the mountain at QGR on Thursday afternoon. There are pathways that he intuitively compares that do not match his goals, such as allowing him and his car to remain at the bottom of their energy wells, as quantum thermodynamics would dictate. For example, he might be sunken into his soft couch in the morning, while his car is resting at the bottom of an energy well in his garage. But he goes against all of that using his abstract prefrontal cortex. He steers his consciousness to choose a cascade of friction, countless quantities of friction-based micro-events that are high probability only because of his abstract EC idea of his mortgage and personal mission to work on quantum gravity. If we had infinite computational power to run a fully detailed quantum thermodynamics simulation of David's day, starting from his couch position at 6:30 a.m., it would be almost impossible that quantum mechanics would dictate that David would remain melted into his sofa while his car stays resting in the garage. At this current early stage of the universe, 99.99% of the particles are not arranged into conscious systems like David. Accordingly, quantum thermodynamics dominates as it seeks to efficiently express the meaning of EP versus choices like David's interest in EC. But David is a rare and glaring hotspot of high EC, thermodynamically deviating the statistical behavior of many systems vulnerable to the influence of his high EC, such as his muscles and the car in his garage. The statistics of consciousness and life are simply not within the regime of quantum mechanics because it is a theory for the probabilities of EP and not EC. The principle of efficient language is baked into the self-simulation hypothesis as a starting axiom. So when there is no hotspot of EC, such as David, the probabilities of the system will strictly follow the statistics of quantum thermodynamics. When there are high EC actors emergent from some system of EP, David's mind, his EC, emerges from all of the EP of his body. In that case, the total system will deviate from quantum mechanics if and only if the life form, such as David, chooses that. And life generally chooses this friction at the end of the day. So, it's important to come to terms with something. Quantum mechanics doesn't predict the actions of high EC animals such as humans that result from thoughts about measurements in a double-slit experiment. A lot of people watching this video who are not trained might presume that somehow the Schrödinger equation predicts that a consciousness observing something will destroy the unitary evolution that the equation spits out. And it's interesting to be aware that this measurement thing came about not by the equations of quantum mechanics, but by empirical experiment. And it's still unclear what the heck is going on. Again, the measurement problem. So the collapse of the interference pattern on the screen of the double slit experiment is just not predicted by quantum mechanics in the Schrödinger equation. The experimenter's opinion or thought about her measurement of the particle going through one slit versus the other slit is obviously within her EC, within her mind. It's a thought. And her thought, called the observation, fundamentally changes the behavior of the EP, of the physicality. Specifically, it modifies the statistics of the quantum thermodynamics given by the probability spread generated from the Schrödinger equation. It literally causes a rewrite of the formerly determined probability spread called the unitary evolution. As mentioned earlier, this is called the measurement problem because it doesn't make sense in the context of quantum mechanics or any known physics. Indeed, that is a big problem. A theory to deal with it is needed. And that's what the self-simulation hypothesis is. The self-simulation hypothesis is a theoretical framework that explains both quantum mechanics, quantum thermodynamics in particular is important to me, in the EP regime, and how and why EC systems modify those probabilities. So it is a beyond quantum mechanics theory. Quantum mechanics is the theory devoid of life. It's the theory for things like rocks and the floor I'm standing on and the atoms therein. It's never been a theory to predict what David did that morning. And so the self-simulation hypothesis is not exactly just an interpretation of quantum mechanics, it is a beyond quantum mechanics theory. So it is what can be thought of as post-quantum or sub-quantum mechanics theory. So in the SSH, we discussed the consensus viewpoint that a future quantum gravity theory will show space and time itself to be just as non-local as quantum mechanics. The problem with quantum mechanics is that it was dropped into a Newtonian space-time box in a rather ad hoc manner. It was not even dropped into a general relativistic space-time framework, and it certainly was not dropped into a quantized version of general relativity. It was dropped into Newtonian space and time. But if a future quantum gravity theory does indeed show quantized space-time to be deeply non-local, as I think most physicists that work in the area would agree, then it will provoke discussions about how a high EC event, that is an event of profound meaning or collective meaning, like World War III, that would be a very high EC event because an enormous number of people would participate in it. It would be physically causal. So a high EC event in the future, such as humanity working out their problems, our problems, that would be a big deal in the future. So then that probability of humanity working out their future, that could enter into a trans-temporal feedback loop with us back here in the past in 2022. So conceptually, this is kind of like how David scanned the future from his couch at 6:30 a.m. to choose certain ordered sets of micro-friction events that would get him to his abstract North Star goal of having a productive afternoon at the top of the mountain. In our quantum gravity assumptions, we go beyond the idea of David merely visualizing from his couch, and we go to this deeper idea that maybe by David having that visualization, in other words, he focuses the rifle of his awareness, his consciousness, onto this thing that he envisions that is fully allowed within the probability spread of quantum mechanics. And he just zones in on it. What if by him doing that in this high abstraction of his EC, He's somehow creating some strange feedback loop that can only be understood with some future quantum gravity theory. If so, then David would want to be careful about what he thinks and what he visualizes and obsesses on. If he were to obsess and visualize on doomsday things, or going home and having an argument today after work with his wife versus having a great conversation, right? What you focus on could start to pull you like a strange attractor statistically in some future quantum gravity theory toward that event. It would form a resonant feedback loop. So put differently, David's intentions and visualizations of Thursday afternoon subconsciously place him into an EC feedback loop with aspects of himself further on in that day. Because he's EC up there, but he's a different EC. In other words, the David at 6:30 is not the David of 3 p.m. So these two Davids form a kind of weird psychic feedback loop in some future quantum gravity theory where that could be allowed. So the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is helpful as an analogy here. So let each possible timeline be a thermodynamic probability for David to say, let's do one of three things. Stay on the couch at the bottom of his little energy well, ditch work and go to the beach, where he doesn't have to do as much friction because it's at sea level. Or push his car 2,500 feet up the hill against gravity and get to work and have that day at quantum gravity research. David's choice about what future timeline to dial in or steer towards causes a subtle feedback loop with that evolution of his chosen future world line and his past back at 6:30 a.m. on the couch. So in our paper, we claim that the self-simulation hypothesis is an interpretation of quantum mechanics. As I mentioned, careful read of that paper reveals that it goes beyond that. So remember, you have to think about quantum mechanics as quantum thermodynamics, the probability theory of physicality, physical things, not EC. The newer idea that we introduced in the paper, EP is just the standard physical thing, emergent. All physicists agree that physicality is emergent from simpler things, like they all agree that DNA emerges from the behavior of atoms. So the newer idea that we introduced, of course, is a fundamental role for EC, or emergent consciousness information. So the self-simulation hypothesis is deeply saying that life goes against the statistics of quantum thermodynamics, or it can go against it if it chooses. Because it can make choices that disregard the primacy of quantum mechanics to seek thermodynamic equilibrium, or the desire of quantum mechanics to avoid friction with high probability. So David might live for 100 years without spending a single day relaxing from his constant mental quest for friction, his constant disrespect for the probabilities dictated by the Schrödinger equation. Schrödinger wrote, "An organism's astonishing gift of concentrating a stream of order on itself and thus escaping the decay into atomic chaos of drinking orderliness from a suitable environment seems to be connected with the presence of the aperiodic solids." So that was 1949, before the word quasi-crystal was invented in the 70s. DNA is a quasi-crystal, by the way. We must therefore not be discouraged by the difficulty of interpreting life by the ordinary laws of physics, for that is just what is to be expected from the knowledge we have gained of the structure of living matter. We must be prepared to find a new type of physical law prevailing in it. He goes on to say, every conscious mind controls the motion of the atoms. And he goes on and on. He in the book, you hear in context how he was really arriving and speaking of metaphors similar to me talking about David on the couch and steering these friction pathways that are simply not what quantum mechanics was built to do, right? Quantum mechanics is trying to emphasize the importance of the universe to create the information of matter, particles and their behavior and the meaning that they have, not the behavior of David's meaning or any of our meaning.